All right. The title of the talk, I think, was the symbolic meaning of life. It's a subject that I don't speak to very often. Uh, Something I've been thinking about more recently. Haven't written much about it yet. Only a couple of articles haven't been published yet. So you're going to get sort of a first impression of what I've been thinking about the past months, mostly this year. Um, I think writing about this has something to do with where I am in my life right now. I'm in my early 40s now, and I think for most people, or at least for me and for some people I know, you get to a point in your life, late 30s, early 40s, when you start thinking about, what is the meaning of it all, right? Why am I alive? What am I supposed to do? If I am supposed to do something or anything at all, um, is usually triggered by the fact that your adolescent dreams either have been realized or you have given up on them. They don't mean much to you anymore. The toughest option is when you've achieved them and then you see them for what they actually were all along, which is sort of gaseous and empty and not very meaningful at all. And you start thinking about this question of meaning. And the curious thing about this word, meaning, is, and it's not only in the English language, I think most languages derived from, that have words derived from Latin, most Indo-European languages, this word has a double meaning. The meaning of the word meaning is double. On the one hand, the meaning of life can be interpreted as what is the objective of life? What is the goal of life? What is the purpose of life at a very high level? And it can also be interpreted as what does life signify, in the sense that a word signifies something, or a traffic sign signifies something. And I was thinking about this, and I don't think it is by chance that the same word has this double meaning. I mean, these are completely different things, right? The purpose of life and what something signifies. In principle, these are totally unrelated. Um, so there may be a hidden message here insofar as language reflects the patterns of human thinking, which it does, about this double meaning of the word. So if we explore one of these meanings of the word meaning, the more basic one, what does something signify? Um, what this means is that for something to signify, it must point to something else. It must point to something beyond itself, like words written on paper, just little squiggles of ink on paper. They have meaning because they point to something beyond squiggles of ink on paper. They are pointing beyond themselves. Their meaning transcends what they intrinsically are. Or traffic signs point at something beyond themselves. It's not just a painting on the side of the road. It is pointing to something else. Even religious symbolism, it's pointing at something beyond its face value appearance, right? Now, this is the first sense in which we use the word meaning. Now, when we talk about the meaning of life, in what way does it relate to this idea of signifying something beyond itself? I think what it does, what it seems to be suggesting, and it's built right into our language, is that the meaning of life may have something to do with what the world itself signifies, which is a very unusual idea in the current cultural mindset. But traditionally, it has been taken for granted. It's the past few generations that have lost contact with this idea. And what is this idea? Is that the world itself is not its own meaning. The world itself is pointing at something else. It signifies something else. And the meaning of life, in the sense of the purpose of life, may have something to do with figuring that out. Figuring out what the message of this whole thing is. What is the message of your life? What is the message of the world, of the events that unfold in life, of the things that happen? Can they be pointing at something beyond themselves, beyond their face value appearance? Now, traditionally, people have always thought that this has been the case. There is a famous French scholar of Islamic thought. His name he died in the late 70s. Henri Corbin. He was a scholar of ancient Persian traditions, Shia Islam mainly. And in a wonderful book, I think of 2012, written by Tom Cheetham, in which he summarizes the thinking of Corbin along these lines. There's a great paragraph in which everything is captured, and he makes a summary of Corbin's thoughts, which basically reflects those Persian traditions. And the idea there was that for the Persians, for those ancient Persians, the world, life in the world, is a metaphor. I think I even can quote literally. At some point, one of those Persian philosophers, he says, to come into this world only has meaning insofar, I'm not quoting word by word anymore, only has meaning insofar as we can take back to true meaning that which is metaphorical. So he suggests that the purpose of life is to crack the code of the metaphor, to understand the metaphor and bring it back to its true meaning, which is outside space-time. In the traditions, it's called paradise. Today, we would say that it's something transcendent or something beyond immediate face value appearances. And in Indian philosophy, we don't need to go back much in time. Non-dual philosophy. One of the biggest exponents of Advaita Vedanta in the 20th century has written, his name was, escapes me right now, which is amazing that his name escapes me because... No, not Ramana Maharshi, Nisargadatta Maharaj. Nisargadatta wrote a very curious sentence in his book, I Am That. He says, to see the world is to see God. There is no seeing God apart from seeing the world. To know God beyond the world is to be God. So what he's suggesting here is that the world is a metaphor, a symbol for what the divinity is. And that to know the divinity beyond the metaphor, you have to be the divinity. You have to know the divinity from the inside. From the outside, all you have is the symbol that points to the inside, which is the metaphor we call the world. And many examples in the Corpus Hermeticum, the Hermetic tradition, it's said literally, well, symbolically, but I'll try to quote it as close as I can. It said that the world is a metaphorical image of the thoughts of God, and that the world itself is a mental creation of God. So what we see is an image of God's thoughts, in a way very similar, for instance, to the way that your brain activity under a brain scan is an image of your thoughts, of your emotions, of your inner life. I have no direct access to your thoughts, your emotions, your inner life. But if I put you in a brain scanner, I can see an image of that, a symbol of that, a metaphor of that, a representation of that has a correspondence with what you feel from inside. So in the Hermetic tradition, this is the brain scan of God. It could be interpreted that way, that this is the image that corresponds to what the divinity is thinking, and the thinking of the divinity is the world itself. I don't want to keep listing examples in the world's traditions about this, but I'll mention one more because it's fairly recent, and it's in the West. A Swedish scientist and mystic called Emanuel Swedenborg, who lived less than 300 years ago. The guy was very smart. He was probably one of Europe's top 3 scientists and engineers and inventors. But he was also a mystic. He had great mystical visions, and he lived at a time when it was not a shame to talk about this. It wouldn't really put down his reputation because he had, as a scientist, because he had mystical visions, and he wrote extensively about them. And one of the things he wrote about, there are several volumes on this, I think. He wrote about the correspondences, what he called the correspondences between the material world and the spiritual world. So his idea was that everything in the material world, even organ systems like your lungs, your heart, were metaphorical representations of a deeper, more real reality in what he called the spiritual world. these days the word spiritual is so overloaded it's difficult to talk about. But he's talking about something more fundamental that has a sort of a reflection, a metaphorical reflection in this. And ultimately, he even tried to write what you could call hermeneutics of the world, a sort of a dictionary. It was a very ambitious project for him, a dictionary explaining what the metaphors meant. He had that kind of project. It was quite amazing. But today, we don't take these things seriously because we live under this cultural narrative that the world is fundamentally outside and independent of mind, and that mind is confined to the skull. It's generated by specific arrangements of subatomic particles inside your head, and there is nothing to mind but that, and it's insulated by the skull, and the world out there does not have those specific configurations, so the world does not have mind. The world is not minded. And whatever is not minded cannot evoke meaning, right? Because what is meaning? Meaning is a cognitive association, is a pointing to. When something has meaning, it's pointing to another thing beyond itself. It's trying to make a forward cognitive association, one thought leading to another thought, or a thought leading to an emotion, which leads to an action or a decision, which leads to a memory, which leads to another thought. So you can have chains and chains of cognitive associations. They can even form loops, such that the thought at the end evokes the first thought you had, and you're locked in that loop. You could call that obsession, compulsive thinking. It can even be pathological. But for something to evoke something else, it needs to be mental. And in our cultural narrative today, the world isn't mental. So the world doesn't intrinsically evoke anything beyond itself. The world is its own meaning in the sense that it has no true meaning. It's just what is. End of story. It signifies nothing. It means nothing. It's just what is. That's the end of it. We can project meaning onto the world. We can attribute meaning onto the world. That's a very existentialist thing, a very Jean-Paul Sartre thing. His insights were valid in the sense that, for instance, he has a passage in one of his books that he says he was looking at a clock, and then suddenly he realized that that object, the clock, had no intrinsic meaning. It meant nothing. The meaning he saw on the clock as an indication of time, meaning that he had to get on with his life or go to his next meeting, otherwise he would be late. He realized, I am projecting all this. The clock has none of this. The clock has no meaning. Words also have no meaning beyond what we project on them, because we invented their meaning. Insofar as we are dealing with creations of human beings, this is fair enough. This existentialist attitude is fair enough, right? We attribute this meaning to things, to artificial things that we created. But when you're talking about nature itself, the meaning of fire as something that evokes sexual passion, or even the passion of an ascetic, which is the opposite, but it's passion nonetheless. According to the cultural narrative we are living under today, that meaning is purely projected onto fire by us. Fire does not have that meaning. Rocks do not have the intrinsic meaning of solidity and eternity and continuity. We project it onto the rocks. Stars do not mean individuality, do not mean your calling in life. We project that meaning onto the stars. That's the cultural narrative today, which basically tells you that the world has no meaning. We make it up. We are cheating ourselves. It's all wishful thinking. That's how we live today. We live in a desert of meaning. It's semantic nihilism taken to the nth order. And if the world signifies nothing, it's very difficult to find meaning and purpose in life in the world. What are we doing here? It signifies nothing. And the basis of this attitude is this separation between mind and the physical. If mind is confined to the skull, then the world can have no meaning. It can evoke nothing intrinsically. And therefore your life has no purpose. It has no meaning in that second sense, because there is nothing for you to derive from the world. Now, is this true? Is this true that mind and the world are fundamentally separate? This can be experimentally verified. There can be experiments set up to check whether the implications of this idea are correct. And they have been set up. And it's amazing that this is not on the news, because we have known this for about 10 years now. And only a small group of people in the net.
Battery empty.
My batteries, I'll have to project my voice now. Only a very small group of people in a field of science called Foundations of Physics actually know what I'm about to tell you. You see, if the world is really out there, outside mind, then there are at least two very intuitive implications of this. One is that the world has to be whatever it is, independent of whether we are looking at it. In other words, a chair has the weight it has the form it has the color it has, whether we are looking at the chair or not. Right? This is a clear implication of this idea that the world is outside mind. Whether you're experiencing the world or not, it is what it is. Another implication is that we can only change the world in the direction of the future through our physical actions. We cannot change the past, because the past has been. If the world is objective, whatever has been is not acquiescent to our mental interference anymore. It's in the past. Two very clear implications of this idea that the world is outside mind. Now, guess what? We can test this. The first implication I referred to, that things should be what they are, whether we are looking at them or not, is technically called non-contextuality. I don't know whether there are physicists amongst you, but that's what I'm referring to, non-contextuality. And quantum mechanics predicts that the world is contextual. In other words, it's not non-contextual, that things only exist insofar as they are observed. And we can test this, because according to quantum mechanics, if you're observing a system from a certain angle, in a certain way, this is more technical, but I'll try to translate that in an intuitive way. If you're observing a system from one side, from a certain angle, with a certain instrument, you should get a set of statistical measurements. If you then observe the exactly same system from another angle, with another instrument, in another way, quantum mechanics predicts that you get another set of statistical measurements. And if you compare the two, they contradict each other. If there is the same system there, existing independently, that you're observing from one side and from another, these things should be consistent with one another. The measurements you make should be consistent with one another. Quantum mechanics predicts that under certain circumstances, they will not be. In other words, there is no independently existing system whose properties you find out by observing them. What exists comes into existence depending on the context within which you observe it. It is the act of perceiving that makes it exist. In other words, the world is not outside and independent of mind. The world exists only insofar as it is observed. Now, I'm making a terminology bridge here that is not extremely rigorous. I'm basically saying that observation is a mental phenomenon. In physics, that's not necessarily the case. There is a lot of debate about what is an observation, what consists in an observation. But there is good reason to think, and I don't know whether you will follow what I'm about to say now, but based on the work of von Neumann, for instance, the von Neumann chains, there's good reason to think that an actual observation has to be mental. It has to be a conscious thing. Because if it's just an instrument, there is no observation, there's just further entanglement of the system. You don't really observe anything. So, now there have been experiments done in 2007, there was one last year, 2015. I think 3 big papers have been published on this in total the past 10 years. Several other less fundamental papers, but 3 quite decisive ones. There is one by Simon Groblacher in Austria, that show that the world, indeed, as predicted by quantum mechanics, is contextual. That things, you cannot speak of an independent reality of things outside observation. That the world exists only insofar as we are interacting with it mentally. There are ways to escape this conclusion, but they are extraordinarily complicated, and they violate
Occam's razor, in my view, they're not parsimonious. They entail arbitrary mathematical acrobatics which aim at saving this idea of an independently existing physical world. I think we should just bite the bullet and admit that that's not the case. Now, if that is not the case, what is the implication of that then for this idea of the meaning of the world? The implications are huge, they are enormous. If the world is mental, it can evoke something else intrinsically. It's not its own meaning, it's not the end of a chain of cognitive associations. It's like a dream, a collective dream. When you wake up in the morning and you remember your dream, do you for a moment imagine that your dream was literally true? That it was its own meaning? That there was nothing more to it but what you experienced in your dream? You don't. The first thing you do is you ask yourself, what did that mean? What did the dream mean? I fell off a cliff. You don't think that you actually fell off a cliff. You think that that embodies meaning. The fall from the cliff is pointing at something beyond its face value appearance. It has a message built into it, amenable to interpretation, right? Now, if the world is a kind of collective dream, because it's essentially mental, then the same applies to the world. The events of your life, your suffering, your pain, your successes, your joy, the people you interact with, their characters in a kind of life drama that, like a dream, may be attempting to evoke something, maybe attempting to evoke an understanding beyond its face value appearances. But how many of us, at the end of a day that has been particularly intense, either for good or for bad reasons, how many of us go to bed and we think, what did this mean? What is in it for me to understand? What do I make out of this? We lost our ability to do this. It doesn't occur to us anymore. It doesn't come to us anymore. We just say, well, it is what it is. It was what it was. That's all there is to it. And I have to live with it. Yeah, life becomes a semantic desert under this narrative, right? And I think we should, based on very good, very hard empirical evidence and very good philosophical rationales that I didn't share with you today, we have reasons to believe that the world is mental, and that has a huge implication for how we live our lives. And I think it's time for us to, as a culture, not only as this cozy group of people who are open to this idea anyway, but as a culture, it's time for us to validate this. It's time for us to drop this existentialist view that the meaning of the world is what we as individual egos project onto it. In other words, that the world has no meaning. We make it up. It's time for us to drop this.
Conscious about this ability that we can change them.
Yeah. I'll repeat the question for everybody to hear it. The question was, if this is a dream, it's a kind of matrix, can we hack the matrix? Can we go and change the laws of nature and make life unfold in a better way for us, in a more favorable way for us? This is a very important topic that often gets misunderstood. So thanks for the opportunity to clarify that. When I say that, in my view, the world is mental, I do not at all mean by this that we as individual egos can change the world by an act of volition. In other words, it is not an implication of what I'm saying that we as little egoic tyrants can go and change the laws of nature to suit our own whims and desires, or to overcome our fears. I don't mean this at all. As a matter of fact, I don't think that's possible at all. I don't think you can hack the matrix. Let me be very clear. Against all the secret approaches to life, it's all very well and fine to the extent that puts you in a receptive mental state to benefit from the opportunities that nature will in any case present to you. That I believe in, but that you can go and hack the laws of nature from the perspective of an individual dissociated ego, which is what I think
we as individuals are, I don't think that's possible at all. The real you is dreaming this all up, but the real you is not your individual self. And I think the vast majority of people do not have a direct experience of their real selves throughout their lives. If it were possible for egos to hack the world, we would have an interesting situation in our hands, because I would want to hack it one way, you would want to hack it another way, and all that story that the universe is infinite and everybody can get whatever they want. Yeah, right.
I have maybe that it's there from the beginning of the source, that we can change the source, because it's not a hacking, it's like using the powers that are there.
I got you now. Apologies for misunderstanding you and answering a question you didn't ask. But I wanted to say that anyway, so I don't regret it. Okay, the actual question is not about hacking the world. The actual question is how you can benefit maximally from the opportunities that the world will present to you anyway. How can you attune yourself to the flow of the world in order to achieve maximum benefit in your life, to have the most productive possible life? That, I think, is a very valid question. Now, to try to return a bit to the subject of the talk, if the meaning of life, in the sense of the purpose of life, has something to do with unveiling the meaning of the world, in the sense of what the world signifies, if that is the meaning of life, the purpose of life, then to benefit maximally from life has to do with achieving the best possible understanding of the metaphor that you call your life. And I think to achieve that understanding as best as you can, maybe the best thing to do is to stay attuned with it, which may sound obvious and trivial, but it's extraordinarily difficult to do, because most of us are very busy running away. Most of us are busy trying to change what is, or refusing to see what is, or not acknowledging what is, or dreaming up what could be. So we are constantly in the past or in the future trying to change the story of reality, instead of being attuned to what actually is, what life is actually presenting to you. So you're not paying attention to the metaphor, and the entire cultural narrative sort of favors this. Just look at science. I come from science. I have a PhD in computer engineering. I've worked at CERN in Switzerland. That has been my world. Still to this day, I work in corporate technology. What science does is to come up with predictive models of nature. In other words, to predict how nature will behave. If this happens, then that will follow. If I do this, then that will follow. Right? If I burn fuel in the cylinders of an engine, then the engine will rotate and I can drive around. Things like this. This is very useful for producing technology, because technology is founded on our ability to have predictive models of nature. But these models only predict the behavior of nature. They have nothing to do with the meaning of nature. So the analogy I make is that we are busy characterizing the envelope and we forget to read the letter. We are busy measuring the carrier of the message, but we never look at the message itself. We can predict which stars will go supernova in the night sky, but we never talk about the meaning of the night sky. And when some people attempt to talk about the meaning of the night sky in unfortunately a very precarious way, like astrology, they are considered nuts. I'm not endorsing astrology. Certainly not predictive astrology about what will happen to you tomorrow. I think that's a caricature and a bad taste caricature. But the spirit behind that is valid, which is the search for the meaning of this metaphor we call the world and we call life. We poo-poo that today. We are busy predicting how things will behave, and we never look at the message. And I think one way to maximally benefit from what nature is already putting in front of you anyway is to just stay with it. When you have a good sitter and you are in a trance, and you're having a particularly difficult experience, a good sitter will tell you, just stay with it. Don't fight it, don't block it,
just stay with it. If we just stay with it, maybe something, some understanding, some insight, not a conceptual one, will come out of that. The Chinese, old Chinese philosophy, it's a cliche what I would say now, but it's so relevant that I will say it. The idea was just flow with the Tao. Don't fight the Tao. What is the Tao? The Tao is the natural flow of the world. It's the instinctive way universal mind sort of unfolds its own thinking, its own mental activity. It's not thought through, it's not metacognitive, it's not self-reflective, it's just the natural way things go. If you stay with that, maybe something will be revealed. The alternative is to fight against it, and then you see nothing.
Not to reflect too much, just live.
Oh, so maybe the world is telling you not to reflect too much. Here I don't know, I'm divided about this. Many traditions will tell you, the focus of many traditions, Taoism, Zen Buddhism, is to make some forms of Advaita, is to drop self-reflection, is to drop this tendency we have to think about our thoughts, to think about our experiences, to just experience and not go into that resonance, that reverberation box of thinking about your own thoughts and thinking about your own desires and trying to change your own thoughts and trying to change your own desires. If that becomes compulsive and obsessive, clearly that is the source of all suffering. Self-reflection is the source of all suffering. If we didn't self-reflect, we wouldn't be thinking about the future, we wouldn't be trying to control the future, and we wouldn't be spending time regretting the past or being angry and upset about what happened. We wouldn't be there. We would be in the moment, like animals are. And suffering would disappear. Pain would remain, but suffering would disappear. And suffering is 98% of the bad part of life, right? Not pain. At the same time, we have this unique capacity in nature to think about our own thoughts, to step out of ourselves and contemplate ourselves as an object of experience. The opportunity for understanding that arises from this is incredible. And I think it's a crime against nature to try to get rid of self-reflection. I mean, nature has labored for, 13.7 billion years, at least in this planet. This planet exists for 4.5, but before even its existence, if you count everything, 13.7 billion years to bring forth a species that could really consistently self-reflect. And that has happened about 100,000 years ago. And we are going to say, let's throw that away, let's not self-reflect.
Yesterday you said that time doesn't exist, we create time.
Yesterday I said that time doesn't exist, we create time. There are two perspectives from which one can speak. I can try to speak from the perspective of outside time, and there is very little to say. Immediately you're running into a wall where you no longer can say anything because time is built into language. It's the structure of language and the structure of our thinking. The other perspective is, if I want to continue talking, I have to put myself in time. And while maintaining in the back of my mind that time is a symbol for something that we are doing cognitively, I can still validly use that symbol and talk about time in a valid way. So I don't think it's a contradiction with my talk yesterday. I'm just speaking from another podium, if you know what I mean. I'm looking at it from another perspective. And if bringing forth self-reflective life isn't a great achievement of nature, then what is? I mean, the emergence of self-reflective human beings is still a mystery.
Maybe it's a trickster.
Maybe it's a trickster archetype. I sense something more behind this. You see, because I don't want to go into too speculative territory here, but it is a mystery why we are here. Because you see, to have the brains we have, it comes at such an enormous cost. Our brains take 25% of the energy we consume, or 25% of our metabolism goes to the brain, and it weighs about 1.5, 2 kilos out of 70, 80 kilos. So it's a tiny percentage in mass of our bodies, and it takes 1/4 of the energy we are able to make available. We are able to get from nature. Our heads are enormous. We are basically born
premature, because otherwise we wouldn't pass through a woman's birth canal. And the benefit of this intelligence comes only much later, because, when you are in the savannah and you're trying to survive an attack by a saber-toothed tiger, to have a big brain that allows you to throw some sharp stones and sticks, it doesn't help much. It only helps a lot later. I mean, we are anatomically what we are already for 50 to 150,000 years. And we developed an ability to actually use our intelligence to dominate the world for 6,000 years of those 100,000. So what evolutionary force was in place to motivate the first 94,000 years of this? So it's only disadvantages. So without trying to speculate too much and exposing myself to evolutionary scientist attacks and neo-atheist attacks, I sense there may be something more behind the rise of self-reflection in human beings. We have the unique ability to think about thoughts, to pull out of ourselves and contemplate who or what we are and who or what we are doing, what we are thinking, what we are feeling, why. This ability to step out of ourselves and contemplate about ourselves is unique. It is the source of all suffering, no doubt about this. It is the one reason we suffer. There is no other. This is it. But I think it opens up opportunities that we haven't leveraged yet. And those opportunities may have to do with unveiling the metaphorical meaning of life. It may have to do with that. Because I tell you, my cat is not thinking about the symbolic meaning of life. But we may be.
Yeah, but more than we are.
Yeah,
it's very convenient to think that we are on the top.
I don't mean that we are. Well, it's very hard to say that we are not at the top in that regard. Even animals with bigger brains than us are.
We are destroying our
being
environment.
We are destroying. We are probably going to destroy ourselves.
So how evolved is that really?
Every advantage comes with a risk, and nature may be willing to take the risk with us. Yes, we are about to destroy ourselves, not the planet. Even if we blow it all up, 1,000,000 years from now, it's all back in place except us.
Yeah, and the animals we kill with us.
Even they will come back in other forms. It's very hard for us to really get rid of life on this planet. It's not going to happen. We will get rid of ourselves. That is very possible.
How intelligent is that?
It's very stupid if you look at it from this perspective. We are going to destroy ourselves. But it may be one of many attempts at a universal scale. And one of them may work and justify all the others that didn't work. And make it worthwhile. All the planets that blew themselves up, if one of them makes it and achieves a stage of harmony with the flow of the Tao, with universal law that is not destructive and still maintains the ability to self-reflect in a healthy way, that alone may justify all the others that blew themselves up.
Do you have a small example from your own life in where you discover and feel this meaning that you tune in?
Do I have an example in my own
meaning?
life where I have discovered the metaphorical meaning of life or the symbolic meaning of life? Yes, and I can't talk about it because you see, the idea of a symbol is different from an allegory. An allegory is just a colorful way to say something that you could say literally, that you could describe directly and make sense of directly. Instead of doing that, you use an allegory because it's more evocative, more colorful, more fun, but it has a direct alternative. A symbol is something that has no direct alternative. There's no other way to point to what it signifies other than the symbol itself. And because there is no other way, it can't be put in words, because words are an alternative for the symbol. I think to achieve an insight about what this means is forever a very personal thing. You can achieve that insight, but the moment you try to put that in words, you kill it. You flatten it. You make a circle out of a sphere. You make a triangle out of a diamond. It becomes a a bad taste caricature of the meaning that you actually felt. And to some extent, I think this is the error Swedenborg made when he wrote about the correspondences. I mean, the intent was purely from the heart. I mean, you can see that when you read what he wrote. The guy is writing from the heart. He's sincere, absolutely. But it doesn't have the impact that he seems to have felt, because he writes it with such an enthusiasm. And when you read what he says, oh, the meaning of this is that, that, and that, and that, it's like, yeah. No, it doesn't reach you. So to answer your question, yes, and that's it. And there's nothing more I can tell you. Because,
I'm asking to know how you do this personally. So the method.
Oh, you want a method? I don't think there is a method other than to just open yourself up to it.
Yeah.
To stay with it. Open yourself up to it. This is not something you're going to compose through intellectual steps of reasoning, neatly tied up by logic. This is not a formal system. This is an intuition that springs from within if you're open to it, and you have no control over how or when it happens.
So how do you open yourself to this?
How do I open myself to this? Okay. You're slowly coaxing me to giving you an answer that I don't want to give. Okay. What I do, I don't know if it works for everybody. The way I use my own ability to self-reflect is to constantly ask myself the questions. And the basic question is, what does this mean? But this question can be reformulated in many other ways, more specific and appropriate to the situation. But only self-reflection allows you to ask yourself the question. If you're not self-reflecting, if you're just going with the Tao, going with the flow, like in a dream, you don't ask yourself the questions. In a dream, you don't ask yourself, where did I come from? What am I doing here? What am I supposed to do? You just flow with it. Because in dreams, you don't self-reflect. Actually, this has been shown by research in 2007. In dreams, we don't self-reflect. We self-reflect after the dream. When we remember the dream, then we self-reflect about it, which is to say we interpret it. So I use my self-reflection not to arrive at answers. I don't think the intellect can ever give you a really meaningful answer. And the intellect is the expression of self-reflection. But I think self-reflection can give you the right questions to ask. And asking yourself the right question is like poking a deeper part of mind that reacts in an automatism. It reacts with an intuitive answer. But you have to poke it. If you don't poke it, it just stays quiet. Because it doesn't have a vested interest in life. It's just there. So I think self-reflection is about developing the ability to poke it through asking the right questions. Once you are confronted with the situation, it has to be alive. It has to be emotionally present. It cannot be an armchair exercise in which you think, okay, let me think now about the meaning of the hurricane in the southern Katrina. Let me think about the meaning of Katrina. Or the Italian earthquake. It cannot be an armchair exercise. But if you're there in the earthquake and it has happened, it affected somebody you know, and you're in the middle of that sort of whirlpool of emotion and feeling and direct experience and life in its raw form. And in that moment, if you ask yourself the right questions, but wait, what does this mean? In whatever form that question comes to you, you may poke on something and an answer may just spring out. If you're attuned to it.
Yeah.
Because most people are not attuned to it at all.
Yeah. I understand the answer.
Do I still have time? Or do I have the... Okay. Okay.
How can a symbol describe feelings better than words can?
How can?
You said a symbol describes a feeling better than words could.
Yes, how can a symbol describe feelings better than words can? That's probably one of the greatest mysteries of nature.
A feeling with words you don't describe directly the feeling. You could, as in poetry, does. It's described from another perspective,
yes.
which just, it's not.
Yes, I think you answered your own question. Poetry is a form of developing symbols with language. So it uses language as more than signs, because language consists of a collection of signs glued together by rules called a grammar. Signs point directly at something. that is accessible to you already. A symbol points to something transcendent, something that requires an intuitive insight. But poets are able to turn the signs of language into symbols that point at those intuitive insights. So I think you've answered your own question. Poetry is a way to do that. It's through language, but it brings language beyond what it was meant to be. It brings language beyond a utilitarian tool. It turns language into a symbol. Corbin talks about it. He talks, Henri Corbin, is a scholar of Persian traditions that I referred to in the beginning. He talks about the event of the symbol. Tom Cheetham also discusses this. The event of the symbol is something that it seizes you suddenly. You don't see it coming. You don't expect it. You may be looking at a symbol that you have looked at many times throughout your life and you never saw anything particularly meaningful or significant in it. But then there's one day, because of whatever, certain conditions, or some people like to say it's grace, whatever the reason is, that you're looking at that same thing and suddenly there is a shift. There's a kind of a cognitive shift. You're seeing the same thing and yet you're seeing something completely else. If you have had that experience once, then you know what a symbol is. And you also know that there is no replacement for a symbol. There is no other way to convey what you feel then, but through the symbol. There is no direct description of it that will do justice to the experience you have. Okay, then thanks for coming. It was fun. And there will be a next speaker, I think it's James.
Yeah.
James Jesso. Highly recommended. I will stay here to watch his 2 talks. If you don't have anything better to do, and I don't hear the beat, so I don't think you have anything better to do, I'll just stick around until James shows up. Yeah? Thanks.
Thank you very much.